association with Bank of Baroda.
Stock markets slide across the world after the Bank of England intervenes in the bond market for the second day. The Sensex slips over 800 points and Nifty loses over 250 points, all sectoral indices in the red.
You know, my view is Elon's very smart. I love reading some of the stuff he does, and let's see, I hope he does a good job.
JP Morgan's Jamie Dimon says he hopes Elon Musk cleans up Twitter, echoing the Tesla founder's concerns over bots on the social media platform. Dimon stopped short of answering when asked if Musk is overpaying for Twitter, but also says the tech valuations will obviously come down. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development releases a new global tax reporting framework for crypto assets, proposes automatic exchange of information between countries, mandatory customer identification, along with rules for exchanges, brokers and other operators facilitating trade in crypto assets. Ukraine's President Zelensky set to address G7 leaders and seek more arms and ammunition after Russian missiles target Kyiv and other cities. US President Joe Biden promises to provide an air defense system. The World Health Organization tells CNBC-TV18 it never inspected Maiden Pharma's facilities or its products, refuting the company's claims. Says the cough syrups linked to the death of 69 children in Gambia may have been contaminated at the point of manufacture, but the exact cause is still under investigation. The Chief Justice of India, UU Lalit, recommends Justice D.Y. Chandrachud as his successor ahead of his retirement in November. If approved, Justice Chandrachud will be India's 50th Chief Justice and will have a tenure of 2 years. Thousands bid an emotional farewell to Samajwadi Party patriarch Mulayam Singh Yadav at his ancestral village in UP. Union Defence Minister Rajnath Singh, Rajasthan's Chief Minister Ashok Gehlot, TDP Chief Chandrababu Naidu and leaders cutting across the political spectrum pay their last respects. Well, the big story today, the Indian telecom sector has seen significant changes over the past 2 decades, and so the government believes it is time for a regulatory overhaul. It has proposed a new telecom bill which aims to replace the 3 laws that currently govern the sector: the Indian Telegraph Act of 1885, the Wireless Telegraphy Act of 1933 and the Telegraph Wires Act of 1950. While there is a need for change, the draft bill, which is up for public consumption and for feedback till the 20th of October, has raised some concerns. For instance, the bill proposes to bring messaging apps under licensing purview, provides powers to suspend internet services and makes KYC mandatory for user verification for telecom service providers. Now, while the government insists that the bill will give a fillip to the ease of doing business, there are concerns the new bill could tantamount to regulatory overreach. Let me quickly take you through just some of the key highlights. The draft bill intends to widen the definition of telecom services to include OTT messaging platforms, radio, emails, and even video calling services. This will require entities like WhatsApp, Google, and Cisco to secure a license from the government's telecom department. Now, secondly, the draft bill may take away much of the telecom regulator's powers. Currently, the TRAI is an independent statutory body which takes the final call on license issuance. But if the draft bill is passed, that power will rest with the government. For the first time, the draft telecom bill clearly provides powers to the government to suspend internet services. No provision has been added for a judicial oversight or a review committee to assess the need for internet suspension. Moreover, the draft bill makes user verification via KYC mandatory for telecom service providers. It is also proposed a 1-year jail term for users providing wrong information. Well, those are just some of the highlights of the proposed bill, which is up for discussion. The draft bill, as we said, has asked for comments to come in by the 20th of October, which is the deadline. To take the discussion forward, I'm now joined by R. Chandrasekhar, former Telecom Secretary, Supreme Court lawyer Gopal Jain, Apar Gupta, Executive Director at Internet Freedom Foundation, and also with us is Rahul Matan, Partner, Telecom Media and Technology at Tri-Legal. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here on the program. Gopal, let me start by asking you, I think there is no argument in saying that we do require a regulatory overhaul. We require a legislative framework that is more aligned and in tune with the current realities of the telecom sector as well as the economic scenario. But The problem that many experts are expressing with respect to this draft bill is that A, it's too wide. B, and I want to address some of the risks that you are highlighting, that this bill seeks to have compliance parity with traditional service providers. That's one of your key concerns. And one of the other concerns that you're raising is that this, in fact, gives telecom service providers enhanced leverage, outsized leverage over OTT providers, DTH service providers, and others. So let me start by asking you, Gopal, what your problems are with the draft bill in its current form.
Well, thank you, Shereen. As you rightly said, outdated and archaic laws of a previous century of a colonial era have to make way for modern, light touch frameworks which provide a fillip to our digital ecosystem. And as we transit into this, the law must be supportive of these businesses, must promote ease of business, and must have clarity in terms of both definition and the contours of the subject matter which it seeks to regulate. Now, let's take the first point. Telecom is all about hard infrastructure. It's called the network layer. Then you have a software layer and the services side to it, a services network. These two are not substitutable. They operate in different spheres. The OTTs have been regulated under the IT rules, which was made as recently as March 2021. And there's also likelihood now of a Digital India bill coming. So the entire IT and internet-based ecosystem will perhaps be regulated by that. But when one looks at the definition of telecommunication services, it is what I call a sweeping definition, perhaps includes everything that there is, both on the hardware side, the IT side, internet side, and perhaps more. So first is synchronization of intent with the language. The intent is to have a modern legislation meeting with the advancement of technology and quote unquote being updated to contemporary times. Then the language of the law must reflect it, must be simple and clear, and clearly define the jurisdiction limits of the various authorities. If not, you would have turf wars, as you rightly said, DOT versus METI, TRI versus DOT, MIB versus DOT. So we can have a slugfest. It will be a regulatory battlefield. So the way forward is to have one enactment instead of having a slew of enactments. One for the telecom hard infra space, the other for the OTT and the internet space. There has to be healthy coexistence so that there is no dispute and the purpose and the objective of the law of having purpose-specific legal regimes and regulations is met. That will be what we say a robust digital ecosystem and legal frameworks commensurate with what it requires in the future.
Several important issues that you raised there. So let me bring the other lawyer into the conversation as well. Rahul, many thanks for joining us. Let me just pick up from where Gopal left off. Sweeping definitions, that's one of the concerns that Gopal has put on the table. Jurisdictional overreach, jurisdictional overlap seems to be the other concern that he's putting on the table, which will in fact lead to regulatory turf wars, a regulatory battle, which will in fact not be helpful when we talk about the ease of doing business, which is what the bill is intending to do. So add to the list of risks that you see with the bill in its current form and how you believe the government ought to address those. We have till the 20th for comments to come in, so let's try and put some on the table here today.
So, I'd like to both agree a little bit with my good friend Gopal and disagree a little bit with my good friend Gopal. I think, I don't think that this is archaic laws being brought into a new framework. I think essentially what the government is doing is it's taking a new approach to regulating the sector. What the government is doing is it's bringing a lot of the provisions that otherwise used to be in licenses into the body of the legislation, which I think is a good thing. And I think we've got to recognize that this is something that is required at this point in time. And that we've got to move away from the old framework. But having said that, I think, the concern, as you rightly put it, is that all this good work of, bringing provisions into the main body of the statute so that it can get legislative sanction, in a sense, is sort of upset because what happens with wide definitions is that the definitions now bring within its ambit a whole range of things, which are, essentially outside the realm, as Gopal said, of what the telecom regulator should do. And I very much agree with the way he framed it. I think when you look at the triumvirate of legislations that are coming up, the Digital India law, the telecommunication law, the privacy law, essentially what we're envisaging is that, at least I hope that's what we're envisaging, is that the telecom law will govern the hard network. The Digital India law will govern the soft network. And privacy, of course, it governs what is done on the network with regard to the privacy of personal data. So I think this is an easy fix. I think we just need to take a look at the definitions, narrow the definitions down, like you've mentioned with telecom services. I think we've got to make it just messages that are delivered over the hard network and not messages on top of those messages. And then we can actually have what we intended, which is to have a legislation that is modern and at the same time fits in with the rest of the legislative frameworks.
Okay, so, minor points of disagreement with Gopal, but consensus on the fact that the sweeping definitions that the current bill provides for need to be narrowed down so that we don't end up in the kind of challenges and problems that that we've just spoken about. But Apar, let me bring you in before I get Mr. Chandrasekhar to comment on this. And two or three of the specific issues that I know you're going to be looking at very closely. The draft telecom bill has expanded the scope of interception to cover all telecom services and telecom networks. OTT messaging services, of course, have been arguing in court that end-to-end encryption is what they do and hence interception is not permitted. The draft bill also clearly provides for powers to suspend internet services. Of course, we've seen that happen, instance after instance anyway, but this now for the first time provides powers to suspend internet services. There is no provision for a review committee to assess the ground for suspension, no provision for judicial oversight on the power to suspend the internet as well. Apar, those are just some of the concerns that, we're picking up on. Add to that what you believe are the chief issues that you believe the government needs to address before this bill goes through?
So thank you so much for this opportunity. And continuing from the previous comments, I would say that when we look at the definition of telecommunication services, which are in clause 221, and we attempt to fix it, we should not stop there. In fact, we should go towards the chapter on which contains clause 24, which has the powers of both interception as well as internet shutdowns, given that they impact end internet users in India, close to about 700, 800 million. Now, what has been the language which has been adopted in this draft telecommunication bill in 2022 is the same as is existing principally to some extent and is being exercised also in the same manner and form under the Indian Telegraph Act. So it's not really a modern exercise of power in a constitutional framework. For instance, it ignores the precedent and the directions of the Supreme Court of India with respect to internet shutdowns in Anuradha Bhasin. And what does Anuradha Bhasin state? It states something very simple, that you need to publish internet shutdown orders, you need to make and the Parliamentary Committee on Standing IT takes it further and says that you need to just make them available. So there can be some data, state governments which are issuing these internet shutdown orders, sometimes to prevent cheating in exams, which causes huge business losses as well, can be prevented. In fact, the Udaipur Chamber of Commerce has approached the Rajasthan High Court challenging them. Secondly, on interception, and I'll make a short point here, the interception language which is adopted is from the time of the telegraph, which then has certain safeguards which were made when there were corded landlines, and it is not compatible with the level of data exchanges which take place today. The safeguards also are absent in the statute, and the rules which have been made under the Telegraph Act actually will continue under this law. So I would say let's not stop at the definition. In fact, there's some need to go ahead.
Yeah. Yes, let's not stop at the definition. And as you point out, that many of the provisions, in fact, are not in alignment with the idea of making this a modern law. But let me bring Mr. Chandrasekhar into the conversation. Mr. Chandrasekhar, in addition to what we've just heard there from Gopal, Rahul and Apar, let's talk about what this in fact means for the regulator, the current regulator, that is the TRAI, and what this does for the DOT. I mean, as a former DOT secretary, when you see the bill in its current form, how do you feel?
Well, I think much has been made of the so-called whittling down of the powers of TRAI. Actually, this relates to the licensing segment, which actually comes under Section 11A of the TRAI Act, which actually falls under the recommendatory powers of TRAI. So even today, in any case, the TRAI's powers there are only of recommendation. So I don't see why there should be any hesitation or reluctance on the part of the government to obtain those recommendations. TRAI's recommendations are always well considered. They are well debated. They have an established methodology of consultation, public consultation, and consultation with all stakeholders. So having that advice before a decision is taken is always helpful. And in any case, the final call has always been, both in the past and under the law as it stands, with the government. The thing is, it may well be, I mean, I would still perhaps give some benefit of doubt that maybe the intention is to still obtain recommendations, but the way that the law is worded perhaps gives an impression that government would take those decisions without consulting TRAI as required under the TRAI Act. And since this act would presumably override all other existing legislations, to that extent, the provisions of Section 11A may not be applicable. That's the apprehension. But as I said, I wouldn't make a very big deal of it at this point, unless it becomes clear that the intention is to not seek TRAI recommendations, which would be, to my mind, a little inexplicable.
Yeah, well, so you're saying that at this point in time, let's give the benefit of the doubt to the government. But Mr. Chandrasekhar, you're saying that you don't want to make a big deal of this specific issue. But is there anything in the bill at this point in time that you do want to make a big deal of, since we are talking about fixes before it becomes law?
Yes, absolutely. I think, I would not want to chase after red herrings at this point. I think, there is a fundamental shift that is happening in the regulatory architecture of the digital space. And that is the point of major concern. What is the shift in the regulatory architecture? As the earlier speakers also brought out, it's currently looked at from the perspective of carriage and applications and content. And by and large, the carriage is what the DOT's domain has been in terms of regulating. There has always been a case for bringing in convergence, so that irrespective of the mode, whether you use cable or whether you use telecom infrastructure, all of them should be regulated under a single law as far as carriage is concerned. So bringing them all together under a single legislation is eminently desirable. However, the boundary line has been in the past, the applications and the technology part has largely been regulated through the IT Act. Now, it's sometimes said that, what's the big deal? OTTs were already regulated under the IT Act, and if they are brought under the Telecom Act, why are people so exercised about it? Well, there are several reasons why I think this is a matter of concern. For one, the telecom law starts with a premise, or starts with a statement, axiomatic statement, that this is a sole preserve of the government. In other words, anybody who does anything in telecom, as far as the carriage is concerned, does so by leave of the government. On the other hand, in the IT sector, and perhaps even in broadcasting, it is the other way around. You can do whatever you want with certain exceptions, which the government would lay down. There's a world of difference between the two. There's also a very practical reason why this combination of heavy-handed regulation and light touch regulation is not only necessary, but is the only way forward. Because telecom is local. It is only within the boundaries of the country, and the law also is local. It applies only within the borders of India.
Right.
But digital content and digital applications are global. And beyond a point, you do not have the ability to enforce some of these provisions. And therefore, again, that becomes a big issue. So I think bringing some of these hitherto, issues that were hitherto covered under the IT Act, under the telecom, is an issue. The second is the definition. Now, it appears that the intention is to bring only OTT communication services and not all OTTs. But there is no clarity on what is an OTT communication service, because remember, every OTT service does have certain elements of communication. Some of them may be encrypted, some of them may be not. Even an e-commerce service does have some communication. Even an Uber has some communication. And therefore, the definition that is there lends itself to any kind of explanation or any kind of interpretation. So that brings in certain uncertainty as to what might be regulated tomorrow. That uncertainty, I think, certainly is not at all a good thing for the startup ecosystem. It's not a good thing for innovation either, because innovating in a space which is tightly regulated is always a problem. So I think from both these points of view, the implications for the startup ecosystem and for a number of OTT services, all of which to varying degrees do include some communication, would worry me, a little bit. There are, of course, many good provisions, and the overall intent in terms of protecting users, easing the metric process are all good. But this
since we're trying to elicit comments on what needs to be fixed before the government closes its window for comments, we are focusing on the points of concern. But Rahul, let me come back to the point that Mr. Chandrasekhar raised. And, as former DOT secretary and former president of NASSCOM, he's saying that he is concerned about the implications for digital entities for the startup ecosystem. Would it be an exaggeration to say that in its current form, what the bill is proposing, we could in fact be headed back into an era of license Raj, because it is at this point in time saying that all entities, whether it's a WhatsApp or a Google or a Cisco or a Skype or a Dish TV, will need to secure a license from the DOT. Would that be an exaggeration, or would that be a legitimate concern?
Well, at this point in time, it may be an exaggeration, because I would say that we still have to see what the new licensing framework is. So let's just try and understand what we've seen so far. We've seen the Telecom Act, this telecommunication bill, replace the Telegraph Act. But the Telegraph Act is not an entire regulatory framework. The Telegraph Act, along with the licenses, is the regulatory framework that we currently enjoy. So if you say that the Telecom Act is now replacing the Telegraph Act, and it has brought a lot of what was previously in the licenses into the main body of the statute, we are definitely looking at a completely different, different framework of licenses. And so I'm expecting that the licenses will be much slimmer and will have much fewer provisions. In that framework, we also need to take a look at what is being licensed. And I think, there are provisions, at this present point in time, lots of things are exempted from license. I would have liked, in Section 3 of the bill, which provides the exclusive privilege, for a subsection to actually specifically state that certain things are exempted. If you just think about, the intercom service that you have at your CNBC office. Now, that is a telecom service, but you shouldn't have to get a license for it, because that is just within your offices. And similarly in my office. And you don't, at this point in time, need a license. And I think under Section 3.3, we will be granted an exemption, but it would have been really nice if the government had put it into the law in a 3.4, which said that nothing here in the act prevent a private telecom network. And in this manner, there are many other things that perhaps if we had excluded in the law would have given businesses clarity.
Okay, Gopal, since we are seeking clarity with this bill, and today we're talking about what needs to change before it in fact becomes law, go ahead, the final comments with you, Gopal.
Yeah. Look, I think the most important thing is when we look ahead, which is forward-looking, we have to move away from the old concept of licensing to a trust-based system. Electricity Act liberated generators from licensing. Telecom infrastructure only requires a registration. Supreme Court has held the terms and conditions of a license are contractual. So let's not live in a bygone era. When we shift, we have to shift lock, stock, and barrel and not bring in expanded licensing. We have to move clearly away from that. So I think the intent is in the right direction, but the manner in which the intent is perhaps going to be implemented, we need to do a rethink and immediate course correction so the act can be implemented and is workable, doesn't run into legal challenges, jurisdictional challenges, and does not become an albatross around the neck, because licensing in telecom only led to disputes, and at least 4 types of licenses were changed over 20-year period. So those are examples to show what to stay away from. So I think we should really think of a new age way of doing it. Authorizations, permissions, contracts, they're all there on the table. So let's not just think of licensing as the only way forward.
Yeah, well, that's just one of the big takeaways coming in from this discussion. And when you have lawyers on the panel telling you that, look, more needs to be done, immediate course correction needs to be done to ensure that there are no disputes, that means that there really is a warning being sort of signaled there. But for this afternoon, R. Chandrasekhar, Apar Gupta, Rahul and Gopal Jain, many thanks for joining us. As we said, till the 20th of October, the government has invited comments to come in for the new telecom bill. This is, of course, the draft that is under discussion at this point in time, and our panel today has suggested areas that require fixes before it becomes law. We will continue this dialogue and this discussion, but for now, on Business 360, many thanks for watching.